My mission, should I choose to accept it, is to turn that into that using nothing but that. Challenge accepted. Hey folks, Dave here. The last video I did was about my first impressions of a new Spider-Man action figure that I purchased, and now it's time to start making some art with that figure. I've been looking at these art of books. This is the art of the Spider-Man Far From Home book, and it's full of all sorts of interesting concept art that can be very useful for inspiration. So I figured I'd take some frames from this book and come up with a shot of my own that will use both the inspiration and the figure itself. So the first thing that caught my eye was these scenes right here. And this look here of the Spider-Man figure, I really like the lighting on this figure. I'm not crazy about the pose, but I really like the art. Whatever I come up with, I want it to have sort of this lighting. Now, another image that caught my eye was this one here, where Spider-Man kind of clinging to the roof of a tunnel. I like Spider-Man's ability to stick pretty much anywhere, and I think the combination of this with the other one's lighting and framing might make an interesting photo. Another example of that is this image right here, which has Spidey crouching on a cave wall, and I really like that pose. So I think taking this pose and the lighting from the first picture, and I think we'll have something I can really work with. So I need a setting for my Spider-Man scene, and Spider-Man is always hanging out in New York City. There's always buildings around, so I figure having him crouched on a wall, hanging to the side of a wall, while having that lighting from the first example image will really work out well for the type of thing I'm trying to go for. So the first thing I'm going to do is create that wall. So for that, I'm going to go to my standby, which is XPS foam, and use this to actually build a wall, because I don't actually have a wall. So I'm going to need something to build for Spider-Man to hang on to. But if I have a wall like this, if I take Spider-Man in a pose like this, and stick them on the wall, I think that is the start of a good photo. I don't really have a complete vision for how the whole thing is going to look, but starting with a wall as a prop and Spider-Man and sticking in front of a camera, that's going to go a long way towards finalizing this shot. So I'm going to jump in and start creating a New York City building. So this is the beginning of my wall that I was working on last night. Last night I carved in the brickwork onto the foam, added in these coins, and this window here, just in case the window shows up in frame. I'm not actually sure if the window is going to show up in frame. It may be filmed from here over, but if it does show up in frame, then it should add some interest to the photo. This black here is actually a combination of black paint and Mod Podge, which is like a crafter's glue, and that gives it a nice black base to work with, so I'm not working with that foam green of the foam like that. I am working with a black surface, which is much easier to start painting with. So I'm going to paint this with a sandstone color, at least with the brickwork, maybe a more traditional stone gray for the coins, and I'll pick a color for the windows as I go along. So I'm going to paint this up, then add some washes and effects to weather it, and then hopefully by then I'll have an excellent wall prop that I'll be able to use for the next step. So let's jump into that. So you got one wall here. I used some weathering and dry brushing techniques to bring out the textures here, and I think these coins turned out really well. I used a plastic from a Ziploc bag to make a quasi window, which hopefully will just have a nice bit of shine if that ever actually hits the screen. So I have the wall, so all I gotta do is put Spidey on this in my light box and go from there and see what else my creative juices will bring to this project. But for now, this really needs to have a good dry and probably a top coat spray. So I'm going to leave this overnight and then pick this up in the morning. Hey folks, it's tomorrow. Good morning. I was thinking earlier this morning when I was going for my daily walk, how I was actually going to set up Spider-Man in my light box. And the only real way to do it there is to have the wall vertical and then Spider-Man stuck on him. But then I was thinking there's no real reason why Spider-Man has to be actually vertical. The reason why it's a problem being vertical is that Spidey weighs about half a pound. It's actually, I weighed him 7.3 ounces, which I don't know what that is in pounds, but it's not a trivial amount of weight. So that was going to be a problem. I didn't want to deal with wires because that's just an exercise in frustration. But if I lay the wall flat and put Spidey on top of that wall, then gravity does most of the work, and all I have to do is kind of keep propped up with a very thin wire, and that's a much more stable situation. And as long as I can shoot the camera shooting down at him so it looks like he's against a wall, then camera magic. Yay! Love me some camera magic. So what I have here, let's start off with Spidey. What I have is Spidey on the table on top of a coffee table type thing I have as lawn furniture. And this gives me two things. One, he's low to the ground, and two, this is see-through, and I figure I could shine a light through it to kind of give a lighting effect. Then I have a couple lights right here, which I will talk about more in a minute. And the big thing here is this tripod, which has my camera facing down on it. And because it's tall, it's actually almost as tall as me, so it's very awkward to use. I brought out my HDMI monitor here so I don't have to stress myself too much because, well, let's face it, I'm lazy and I'm okay with that. And I have these lights set up, and let's take a look at what these lights actually do. I'll take a shot and turn on each of these lights individually, and then you can see what the effect is. Now this first light here is to shine a little bit of atmosphere light. It's not turned on super bright. This is a Lume Cube Panel Go, which I picked up. It's one of my Christmas presents. So if I turn it on, he just gives a little kiss of light onto his front, just so he's illuminated and not completely in shadow. Now, this light here is meant to shine light onto Spider-Man. In my world, I'm picturing Spider-Man sitting here and the kind of a moon kind of behind him, or some sort of city light behind him. So he's going to get some bright light reflected on his edge of his body. So this is what that is trying to accomplish. So if I turn this on and crank her up, you can see it shines a lot of light right onto Spidey. It also shines some light onto the background there, which is something I'm going to have to deal with in post, but that's fine for me. And then finally I have one more light, and that light is to kind of indicate the moon. So that light is way down here. These are just Lume Cube lights. This is actually just off of frame. But if I just turn them on once, and I've been using these Platypod Ultras with goosenecks to keep them elevated. If you don't have these, they are a frickin' lifesaver when it comes to setting up your lights and trying to set up your cameras low. I use them all the time. I love them, and they're a great investment. Not a product placement. Hashtag. If you notice, I have 3 lights, and one of them is kind of like the moonlight, and it doesn't look very good. And that's okay for my purposes. My goal right now is not to get everything in camera. That is folly, and I'm not going to fall for it. I have Photoshop skills. I'm going to use them. What this is just a lighting reference. I'm going to replace the background of Spider-Man with an actual moon and clouds, which either I'll create in Photoshop or use a stock photo. So this is just trying to capture Spidey and the wall itself. Everything else is just lighting reference. It's very hard to fake light on figures. It's very easy to fake light in the sky. So I want to capture the light on the figure, and that's my main goal right here. So I think I got all the shots I need, but before I start tearing everything down, I'm going to grab my memory card and run into the house and just make sure that everything looks good on the computer, because you really can't tell if a shot is super good until you're actually looking at it on a computer monitor, nice up and big. So I'm going to just verify that I have everything before I tear all the stuff down, because setting it back up again is a pain in the ass, and I don't like those. So I am going to double check, and then if I need to get extra shots, I'll go get my extra shots, and then I can go on to post-processing. Fun. Alrighty, so welcome to post-processing. So this is the final image that you see here in Photoshop, and I'm actually quite pleased with this image, but let's break it down to see what I did to get from camera to this final image. So if you look in the layers panel on the side here, you'll see that there's 4 basic areas involved with making this image. The first is Spidey himself. The second is the background image. Third is some atmospheric effects. And finally, a vignetting. So let's start with Spidey himself. I have that all wrapped up in a smart object. So let's click on that and see what I did in here. So with this smart object here, what I actually have is 2 layers here. Let me turn off the masking. So I have one layer, which is the edge light, and the other layer is the atmospheric light. And I merged the two together using some blend modes. And what you're left with is Spider-Man with 2 lights shining on him, the edge light and the main fill light that I had outside there. And then all I did after that was just added some brightness contrast adjustments, and then added a layer of fixes for just a few little dust spots that you can barely see, but that cleaned them up nicely. And that made Spider-Man lit the way I wanted him to be lit. And that's it for that. So I'm going to go back to the main image. That left me with Spider-Man here, and I took away the background by adding a layer mask. And then I started filling in the actual background. And that changes are all down here. And the main aspect of the background here is this texture right here, which is just a regular texture. I use this a lot. I use this in a lot of my work, and I just blurred it out so it kind of looks a little bit more like clouds. And then just a couple blend modes to kind of make it all fit in, and that's the background with Spidey. Then I added a couple little changes to the image just to improve a few weirdnesses with it. The first is I added a brick highlight. You can barely see it, but if you look at the edge of the brick, right in here and right in his arm right here, I just added a little bit of highlight just to kind of let the background merge with the main scene a little bit easier. Then I added some contact shadows with his feet and his fingers. Or despite the fact that Spider-Man was actually touching the wall when I took the shot, the shadows did not really come out as expected. So I just added a couple extra shadows just to kind of really center the fact that Spider-Man is holding onto that wall. So the next step is the atmospheric effects, and that's several layers of different lights and textures to just cement Spider-Man and give it the look that I really wanted. The first thing was this little bit of fog, which is just put in with a brush with a very low flow and low opacity, just to kind of give a little bit of interest to the bottom level there. And then some skylights, what I call skylights, which are basically just put in with a brush. And that just kind of simulates a moon and a couple moon rays coming through the mist. And then I added this texture here, and this texture is literally just that with a little bit of blur on them. So the texture normally looks like that. Added some blurs and cut down on the yellowing of it with the hue saturation. And what that leaves me with, an interesting light pattern. One, it adds a little bit more fog effect to the sky. And it adds a kind of a unifying color across the whole piece. And it adds a little bit of extra. If you watch like in this corner here, the texture just kind of subtly changes the lights on the image, which I've always found appealing, so I've always added that to my work. And finally, there are a couple of color lookup tables just to change the color grading
of the scene. This one here kind of dulls down the red in the scene. Spider-Man is very red. He's almost a little too red. So I dial him down a little bit just to kind of mute the colors a bit. And then the second one just kind of darkens everything up just a little bit more. And then finally I added this vignette, which darkens the edges just to kind of put the visual focus on Spider-Man himself. So that's pretty much all I do with post-processing. Fairly simple overall. So I'll leave you with the final image. And if you like my content, please hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.